as darkness blanketed the quiet suburban neighborhood. Sarah, a seasoned babysitter, settled into the cozy living room of the Johnsons' home. It was just another babysitting gig, or so she thought. With the Johnson children sound asleep upstairs, Sarah's evening had begun like countless others. But this night would unfold in ways she could never have imagined. Sarah had babysat for the Johnsons several times before, and she felt at ease in their home. The gentle hum of the grandfather clock provided a soothing backdrop to her evening as she read a novel on the couch. The phone rang, shattering the silence, and Sarah answered, expecting it to be the parents checking in. Instead, a guttural voice on the other end whispered your name. Her blood ran cold, and her heart quickened. She slammed down the receiver, convinced it was a prank call. But unease had settled in your gut. Sarah tried to shake off the eerie call, attributing it to an overactive imagination. She checked on the children, ensuring they were safe and sound, then settled back into the living room. An hour later, the phone rang again. With trembling hands, Sarah answered, only to hear the same whispered voice, closer this time. I see you, Sarah, it hissed. Panic set in as she scanned the room, but there was no one in sight. Sarah knew she had to act. She quickly locked all the doors and windows, trying to convince herself that it was just a cruel prank. She even considered calling the police, but without any concrete threat, she felt foolish. What could she tell them? That a voice on the phone had left her terrified. Hours passed in tense silence, her eyes darting around the room. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The presence of an unseen foe weighed on her, suffocating her sense of security. Just as Sarah thought the worst was behind her, the lights flickered and went out. Her heart pounded in your chest as she reached for your phone, its feeble glow providing the only source of light. In the dimness, she heard a faint rustling, like footsteps. Fear clenched at her throat as she realized the intruder was in the house with her. She grabbed the children, huddled together in their pajamas, and ran for the front door, flinging it open and racing into the night. Neighbors called the police, who arrived swiftly, searching the house. They found no intruder, no sign of forced entry. The officers took a statement from Sarah. You could barely find words to explain the horror she had endured. Days later, Sarah received a call from the Johnsons. They had reviewed the security footage from the house and discovered something chilling. In the footage, they saw Sarah answering the phone, but there was no voice on the other end. Her face contorted in terror as she whispered her own name. Sarah was left shaken and haunted by the inexplicable events of that night. She had no explanation for what had happened, no closure to ease her fear. Emma had always been a responsible teenager, and babysitting for the Smith family was a regular part of her routine. Their cozy suburban home, nestled at the end of a quiet street, had never held any secrets until one chilling night. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, Em arrived at the Smiths' home. Their two children, Lucy and Max, greeted her with smiles. To Emma's surprise, their parents were already gone. Usually they would leave right she arrives. Then it was business as usual. Dinner, a bedtime story, and texting kids. Everything seemed ordinary, but that was about to change. After ticking Lucy and Max into bed, Emma settled into the living room. Her homework spread out on the coffee table. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of appliances. The parents had left her with clear instructions, assuring her they'd be back by midnight. Around 9 o'clock, Emma was startled by a faint sound, a whisper, barely audible. She dismissed it as a trick of her imagination and continued her work, but the whispers persisted, growing slightly louder and more distinct. Emma strained to hear, her heart quickening. She rose from her seat, her footsteps muted as she ventured down the dimly lit hallway. The voices seemed to emanate from Max's room. Emma pushed open the door to Max's room, expecting to find him awake and talking to himself. Instead, she found him sound asleep, his room bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight. But the whispers were undeniable, coming from a corner of the room where there was nothing but shadows. Fear clutched at Emma's chest as she stepped closer, straining to understand the words. The voices were speaking in hushed, urgent tones, but their words were incomprehensible. Emma wondered if it was a malfunctioning baby monitor, but there was no such device in the room. Panicked and unsure of what to do, Emma decided to call the parents. She dialed their number, and Mrs. Smith answered. She explained the strange occurrence, but Mrs. Smith reassured her, attributing it to an overactive imagination. Reluctantly, Emma hung up and returned to her seat in the living room. The whispers had ceased, leaving her feeling foolish. She chastised herself for being scared by shadows and continued her homework. Time passed, and the clock ticked past midnight. Emma grew more and more anxious as the parents hadn't returned. Just as she decided to call them again, the whispers returned, this time even louder and more insistent. With trembling hands, she followed the voices once more, leading her to the basement door. The whispers seemed to emanate from below. Her heart pounding, Emma descended the creaky staircase into the dark basement, her phone's flashlight illuminating her path. In the basement, the voices reached a crescendo, now undeniably human. As the light swept over the room, she gasped in horror. There, huddled in the corner, were the Smith parents, gagged and bound. Their eyes pleaded for help as muffled cries escaped their lips. Emma immediately called the police, who arrived within minutes to rescue the Smiths. The parents explained that they had been bound by intruders who had whispered threats and demands while holding them captive. It was only when the voices ceased that they knew Emma had returned. The police launched an investigation, but the intruders were never found. The Smiths moved away, their lives forever changed by that harrowing night. Emma, though hailed as a hero, could never forget the whispers that led her to the basement. It was a nightmarish ordeal that left her with a chilling realization: sometimes danger can lurk in the shadows, and the ordinary can turn into something unimaginable. The moon bathed the quiet Anderson's home in a soft, silvery glow. It was another night of babysitting for me. I had looked after Lily and Ethan countless times before, so everything felt routine and familiar. Dinner, playtime, bedtime stories, it was all part of the drill. I settled into the cozy living room with a book, the clock ticking towards 9 o'clock. The children had drifted off to sleep, and all was peaceful. The only sound was the faint chirping of crickets outside, and I anticipated a tranquil night ahead. Around 10 o'clock, a slight creaking sound jolted me from my book. My heart skipped a beat as I realized the sound didn't belong to the settling house. It was coming from the front door. I inched down the hallway, my heart pounding like a drum. As I reached the living room, a wave of terror washed over me. A stranger, a man I'd never seen before, stood right in the center of the room. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting an eerie glow over him. His eyes met mine, and they sent shivers down my spine. They were empty, void of any emotion, and in his hand, he held a knife gleaming with malice. I was frozen in place, unable to scream or run. He didn't utter a word. His silence amplified the dread in the room. Fear turned my limbs to lead, but I couldn't afford to stay frozen. As the man approached, I summoned every ounce of strength and darted to the side, narrowly evading the swipe of his blade. Racing down the hallway, I made my way to the stairs, taking them two at a time. The man's footsteps echoed behind me, each one drawing him near. My heart was a wild drumbeat in my chest as I reached the children's rooms. I scooped up Lily and Ethan, their sleepy eyes wide with confusion and fear. I knew I had to get them out of that house and away from the man who had invaded our sanctuary. I rushed to the window, my trembling fingers fumbling with the latch. As I pushed it open, the man's footsteps drew closer. I could hear his ragged breath, feel his malevolence filling the air. With one final, desperate push, I hoisted Lily and Ethan onto the roof of the porch below. I scrambled out after them just as the intruder reached the children's room. He lunged at me, but I managed to get onto the roof, my heart pounding, my mind racing. Terrified and desperate, we climbed down the roof and ran away further from the house, and I called the police from my cell phone. Later we watched as the intruder was arrested, his sinister plans filed. It turned out that the man had a history of mental illness and had somehow entered the house while I was preoccupied. The police assured me that I had acted bravely and had saved Lily and Ethan from a horrifying fate. When the Andersons returned home, they were relieved to find their children safe and the intruder in custody. They thanked me for my courage, but the night's events haunted my dreams for years to come. If you like these stories and want more, click on one of these videos. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Thank you.